Luxembourg City, January 7, 1945, 1800 hours. The Battle of the Bulge is finally collapsing in the frozen forests. But inside the Allied headquarters, the war is far from over. General Omar Bradley, known to the world as the GI's general, is sitting at his desk. He is a man famous for his calm, almost boring demeanor. He doesn't carry pearl-handled revolvers like Patton. He doesn't wear a beret like Montgomery. He looks like a school teacher grading papers. But right now, the pencil in his hand is about to snap. He has just read the transcript of a press conference given that morning by Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery. For weeks, Bradley has swallowed insults that would make a lesser man scream. He has watched his armies be taken away, his tactics ridiculed, and his soldiers used as pawns in a British ego trip. But this transcript is different. It is not just an insult, it is a theft of history. Most historians focus on the loud arguments of Patton, but the most dangerous moment for the Allied alliance didn't come with a shout. It came with a whisper. When the quietest man in the room finally decided he had had enough, he reached for the secure phone line to Dwight Eisenhower. He wasn't calling to negotiate. He was calling to quit. The school teacher was about to teach the Supreme Commander a lesson. To understand the weight of this refusal, you must understand the man. Omar Bradley was an anomaly in World War II. In an army of peacocks like MacArthur and Patton, Bradley was a sparrow. He looked like a university professor who had wandered onto a battlefield. He wore standard-issue uniforms, ate with the enlisted men, and detested the spotlight. He was the soldier's general. He believed that a commander's job was to clear the path for his men, not to chase headlines. For 2 years, from the dust of Tunisia to the hedge of Normandy, Bradley had accepted his role as the reliable subordinate. He stepped aside to let Patton take the glory in Sicily. He stepped aside to let Montgomery take the lead in K. He operated on a simple, naive belief. If you do your job well, credit will take care of itself. He trusted the system. He trusted his friend Eisenhower to be the fair referee between the American workhorses and the British show ponies. But Bradley didn't realize that in coalition warfare, silence is often mistaken for weakness. He thought he was being a good ally. Montgomery thought he was being a doormat, and doormats are made to be stepped on. Throughout the bitter winter of 1944, Bradley clung to a singular belief. We are one team. Even as the Germans launched their massive counteroffensive through the Ardennes, shattering the peace of the Ghost Front, Bradley tried to maintain his composure. He knew the alliance was fragile. He knew Churchill and Roosevelt were watching. He suppressed his ego for the greater good. When Patton raged about British interference, Bradley calmed him down. When the press asked leading questions, Bradley gave diplomatic answers. He genuinely believed that fighting the Germans was the only priority, and that petty squabbles over command boundaries were distractions. He assumed that Montgomery, for all his arrogance, felt the same way. He assumed that when American blood was spilling on the snow, the British Field Marshal would treat the crisis with a solemn respect it deserved. It was a belief born of American optimism. It was a belief that was about to be dismantled piece by the cold machinery of British ambition. The betrayal didn't start with a speech. It started with a map. The first crack in Bradley's resolve appeared on the night of December 20th, 1944. The German Panzer offensive had driven a physical wedge 45 meters deep and 60 meters wide into the American lines. The telephone lines connecting Bradley's headquarters in Luxembourg to his northern armies were cut. Eisenhower, citing communication paralysis, made the fateful call. At 10:30 p.m., he ordered the transfer of the U.S. 1st Army under Courtney Hodes and the U.S. 9th Army under William Simpson to Montgomery's 21st Army Group. The numbers were catastrophic for Bradley. In a single administrative stroke, he lost command of 200,000 American soldiers. He lost 2/3 of his combat power. He was stripped of the elite divisions he had trained since D-Day. Overnight, the commander of the largest American force in Europe was reduced to leading only Patton's Third Army in the South. It was a demotion in everything but name. Bradley argued that his radio links were functioning perfectly, but the decision stood. He was forced to hand over his men to a rival who openly despised American tactics. But the loss of command was just the beginning. The second crack was personal. On December 25th, while American troops were freezing in foxholes, Montgomery arrived to inspect his new command. He did not come quickly. He arrived at 11 a.m., driven in a polished Rolls-Royce, wearing a pristine uniform that contrasted sharply with the mud-caked Americans. His first act was to cancel the American counterattack. Bradley and Hodges had prepared a plan to strike the German flanks near Hufeilisse immediately. Montgomery looked at the plan and threw it out. He ordered a tidying of the lines, a retreat to defensive positions. This decision delayed the Allied counteroffensive by nearly 2 weeks. While 12 American divisions sat idle under British orders, the Germans were allowed to consolidate their gains. Montgomery lectured veteran American generals, men who had commanded corps in combat for years, on the basics of infantry defense. He treated the U.S. First Army not as a partner, but as a broken unit that needed British discipline to survive. For Bradley, watching from the sidelines, this wasn't just caution. It was professional malpractice. But the deepest insults weren't happening in the map room. They were happening in the trenches. To understand why Bradley's blood boiled, you have to look beyond the generals and look at the mud. The conflict wasn't just about egos, it was about survival speeds. American GIS fought with a desperate improvisation. They wanted to move fast, break things, and get home. Montgomery's 21st Army Group fought by the book, a very slow, very thick book. Reports filtered back to Bradley that were maddening. American units ready to counterattack were ordered to halt and wait because British flanking units hadn't finished their morning reorganization. While American medics were screaming for support to evacuate wounded men, British liaison officers were calmly denying artillery requests because they hadn't been cleared through the proper channels. It wasn't just annoying, it was lethal. One American commander wrote that fighting under Montgomery felt like trying to sprint while wearing lead boots. The bureaucratic paralysis meant that German tanks, which could have been destroyed in minutes by American initiative, were allowed to escape because British protocol required a signed order. Bradley felt every one of these delays as a personal wound. He realized that Montgomery's caution wasn't saving lives. It was wasting them. His men were dying not because of German bullets, but because of British red tape. The final shatter didn't come from a German tank. It came from a microphone. On January 7, 1945, the butcher's bill for the Battle of the Bulge was sitting on Bradley's desk. It was a piece of paper heavy with death. 246 American soldiers killed, 4,700 wounded, and 23,000 missing. It was the bloodiest month in U.S. Army history. Then Bradley turned on the radio to hear Montgomery's press conference. For 30 minutes, he listened to a fantasy. Montgomery spoke of the battle not as a desperate struggle for survival, but as a tidy British operation where he had sorted out the mess. He claimed credit for the victory using a sickening distortion of data. In the critical northern sector, where the attacks were fiercest, Montgomery's own British XXX Corps had suffered fewer than 200 casualties, mostly because they were held in reserve. He was claiming a victory bought entirely with 80,000 American casualties. To Bradley, this wasn't just arrogance, it was stolen valor on an industrial scale. Montgomery was building his legend on the corpses of American boys from Kansas and Ohio. The math was nauseating. Every time Monty said, "I," Bradley felt it as a desecration of the men freezing in graves at Ham. The illusion of the noble ally didn't just break. It rotted right there on the desk. The school teacher realized he was working with a thief. The room inside the Luxembourg headquarters went dead silent. Bradley didn't scream. He didn't throw the transcript against the wall like Patton would have. Instead, a terrifying calm settled over him. It was the coldness of a man who has been bent until the metal finally snaps. He stared at the phone. For 3 years, he had been the nice guy, the doormat, the glue keeping the alliance from falling apart. He had let Eisenhower sell his dignity to keep Churchill happy. No more. He picked up the secure line to Eisenhower. His voice was conversational, almost gentle, which made the words sound like a death sentence. "Ike," he said, staring at the snow falling outside the window, "you have a choice to make. I cannot serve under Montgomery. If he commands American troops again, you can send me home." He didn't offer a compromise. He didn't ask for an apology. It was a binary ultimatum, him or me. In that frozen moment, the subordinate died, and the commander was born. He was holding a gun to the head of the Allied command structure. The silence on the other end of the line was heavier than any artillery barrage. The doormat had just become a stone wall. Eisenhower put down the receiver. His hand was trembling. He realized Bradley wasn't just threatening to resign. He was threatening to collapse the entire American command structure in Europe. For the first time, Ike understood that he had pushed his best friend too far. The news spread fast. George Patton, hearing of Bradley's stand, immediately threw gasoline on the fire. "Tell him to go to hell, Brad." Patton roared over the phone, "I'll quit with you. We'll both go home and tell the truth." Suddenly, Eisenhower faced a mutiny of his top field commanders. The entire U.S. command structure was solidifying against Montgomery. The political cost of appeasing the British had just become too high. Eisenhower realized he could no longer sacrifice his own generals to save Churchill's feelings. The one-team illusion was dead. It was now Americans versus British, and the Americans had the numbers. Why did this wound go so deep? It wasn't just about military tactics. It was about class warfare. Montgomery looked at Bradley and saw a rustic colonial, a commoner from Missouri who lacked the breeding of the British aristocracy. Monty treated American soldiers not as partners, but as raw biological material to be managed by superior British intellect. But the deeper, darker wound was inflicted by Eisenhower. Bradley and Ike were classmates, best friends. By allowing Montgomery to humiliate Bradley for weeks, by stripping his command and forcing him to beg for scraps, Eisenhower had committed the ultimate personal betrayal. Bradley realized that Eisenhower had sacrificed their friendship on the altar of politics. He had sold out his own generals to keep the peace with London. The explosion on January 7th wasn't just about stopping Monty. It was Bradley forcing Eisenhower to stop being a politician and finally act like an American commander. It was a scream of pain from a man who realized his loyalty had been used as a weapon against him. He forced Eisenhower to look in the mirror. Eisenhower's reaction was swift and decisive. He didn't just write a reprimand to Montgomery, he physically altered the map. On January 17, 1945, barely 10 days after the press conference, the U.S. First Army was returned to Bradley's command, weeks earlier than Montgomery had planned. The effect was electric. Bradley, unshackled from British supervision, unleashed his armies with a new cold fury. He ignored Montgomery's pleas for support in the north. He drove the 12th Army Group aggressively towards the Rhine. He was no longer waiting for permission. And then came the moment that proved he was right all along. The ultimate proof that Bradley was right to revolt came in March 1945 at a place called Reagan. This was the moment the school teacher finally took off the gloves. Montgomery was meticulously planning a massive set-piece crossing of the Rhine River in the north. It was typical Monty. Weeks of preparation, thousands of artillery guns, and millions of tons of supplies. He demanded that all Allied efforts pause to support his grand show. He wanted the glory of being the first across the Rhine. But Bradley, now operating with cold independence, ignored the script when elements of his 9th Armored Division found the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen miraculously intact. Bradley didn't ask for permission. He didn't call Montgomery. He didn't even wait for Eisenhower. He shouted one order, "Get across." And while Montgomery was still rehearsing his lines for the main performance, Bradley's troops were pouring across the Rhine. By the time Monty launched his expensive Operation Plunder, Bradley already had 4 divisions on the German side of the river. When news broke that the slow, rustic Americans had beaten the British to the prize, the humiliation was reversed. Montgomery was furious, but he couldn't say a word. Bradley had proven that speed and trust in subordinates worked better than rigid control. The capture of Remagen shortened the war by weeks. It was Bradley's silent, devastating answer to the press conference of January 7th. He didn't need a microphone to claim victory. He just needed a bridge. The personal relationship between Bradley and Montgomery was incinerated. For the rest of the war, Bradley treated Montgomery with icy professional distance. During the encirclement of the Ruhr Pocket in April, Bradley famously kept his operational plans vague when talking to the British, fearing Monty would try to slow him down to catch up. He refused to coordinate his movements with the 21st Army Group unless explicitly ordered by Eisenhower. The good ally became the independent operator. This shift accelerated the end of the Third Reich. It proved that when the American military machine stopped worrying about diplomatic niceties and started fighting its own war, it was unstoppable. In the history books, they stood together on Victory Day. But in the private corridors of memory, Bradley never forgot the press conference. He never forgot the theft of honor. Trust once broken is the only thing that cannot be rebuilt. Omar Bradley is often remembered as the GI's general because he looked like a common soldier. But his greatest act of love wasn't on a battlefield. He was on a secure line in a quiet office. By refusing to take orders from Montgomery ever again, he reclaimed the honor of the U.S. Army. He taught history a valuable lesson. Humility is a virtue, but self-respect is a requirement. There comes a moment when even the quietest man must stand up and say, "Enough." On that day, the school teacher didn't just teach a lesson. He commanded respect.